All right, hello, welcome to Tech Teacher Support. I am Chris, and today we are going to build our first iOS app. I've got it right here on my iPad. We're going to code it on Xcode 11 on our MacBook here, and I'm going to take you through the steps. So if you want a more in-depth version of this video, I made a 5-part series earlier that goes slowly through all the steps very specifically. This is more of the video where we do it all at once, and so it's going to be a little bit quicker as we go through. So if you find this video too quick and you want it kind of explained in better detail and broken down a little bit more, go back and watch the 5-part series, and that'll answer probably all of your questions if this is a little too much. So for those of you that have maybe dabbled in code a little bit or tried this before, this is going to be for you, because we're going to go from start to finish, from nothing to a fully functional interactive app. So right here on the screen, what I'm going to do is just pull the app up. It's called Color Mixer, and it's from this book called Intro to App Development with Swift. And this is an Apple book, and we'll go through this really quick here to show you what the app looks like, and then we'll dive right in and I'll show you how to build it. All right, here we go. So the app is called Color Mixer. I'm going to launch it right here on my iPad, and I'm going to hit our reset button. And what this app lets you do is move these sliders and turn on different colors to sort of mix and get a color that you like. And let me show you. It starts with the black, and I'm going to turn on red here. And there we have red, and we can use this slider to sort of change the intensity of that red. And then I'm going to turn on a little bit of green, and it's going to mix in with the red, and so we can start to get some oranges and maybe some neon colors, green here. And then I'm going to turn on this last blue, and again we can start to mix with these sliders and get almost any color, millions of colors you can get through this. So this is a really fun app. It's called Color Mixer. And the reason that I always do this with students as their first app is a couple of reasons. Number one, it's interactive and you get to build a user interface. So not only are we going to write some code, but we're also get to build this interface with switches and sliders. And I think that's a really good intro app, because almost every app you use is based off of the user interface. So whether you're in Instagram, double clicking to like something, or scrolling, or you're on your weather app and you're zooming in or out, everything is based around user interface. So I always use this app first because we build the interface and write the code. And number 3, the reason I like it is because you can send it right over to your device and test it right on your device just like you would be using it. So that's why I always recommend hooking up your personal device or having students hook up their iPad so they can test it on their device, go home, show their friends and family, and really brag about their new skills building an app. It's an incredible set of skills. So here we go. All right, over here to this side, the left, I have listed sort of 6 things we're going to go through, and then we'll dive right into Xcode, which is number 1. So Xcode, as you can see under Let's Build an iOS App, Xcode is the app that we build other apps with, and it's an Apple app, and it's free, and it's on the App Store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Xcode here, and there's actually the finished product, but I'm going to close that out. We're going to stop everything. Okay. And then let's just pull Xcode back up, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to hide this. All right, so on my screen I have Xcode. Welcome to Xcode, and you can find this on the App Store. And so here's the App Store. I pulled it up, and you're going to want to get the most recent version, which is Xcode 11. That's what we'll be using. So if you want it to look just like what you're seeing on the screen, you're going to want to make sure you get Xcode 11. And of course, mine up here says open, and I'll highlight that for you. But if you have never downloaded it before, yours will say get. So you're going to want to get Xcode 11. All right. And that is in the App Store. Okay, and here's Xcode, and we're going to start our app here in a second. Number 2, though, what you want to get is the book. book. So we're following along with a book that Apple has made called Intro to App Development with Swift, and you'll see it there on the screen. There's also a teacher guide that goes along with it. So if you're teaching this in a curriculum across a class and you want some help sort of explaining in deeper detail more of the concepts that we're going over, you can download the teacher guide as well, and that is free too. And let me show you that. I'm going to pull up down here the bookstore on a Mac, and that is Intro to App Development. So I'm right here at the book, and again, I've already downloaded it, so mine says read it. Yours might say get. But this is part of a whole series, and again, there's a teacher version of this as well. And if you want, you can click up here on Apple Education, and I'm up here at the top of my screen. And if I click Apple Education and look at their other offerings in the bookstore, you can see it is quite a bit. It goes into a lot of creativity, a lot of sort of more in-depth coding as well, and it also goes backwards, so it does more intro level coding too. So that's the book we are going to do, is called Intro to App Development with Swift, and I'm going to go ahead and just click read on that. All right, because we are going to go, as you can see on number 3 here, we're going to go straight to chapter 17, and it's called Actions and Outlets. And chapter 17 is obviously way deep in the book, and we're skipping over 16 chapters, but it's the app, I think, in the book that you build that is the most fun and has the most sort of interactivity and combines a lot of the sort of fundamental intro concepts. So you can obviously go through chapters 1 through 16 and build other apps and learn sort of the building blocks behind how this all works. But if you want to follow along today, just jump right to chapter 17, and that's where we're going to go. And then finally, number 4, over here, you can see I connected my iPad with a cable right to my laptop. This is because when we build and test, like number 5 here, and we build and test, I always find it to really sink in deeper with students when it's on a physical device. Now, you can send your code over to what's called a simulator and have it simulated on the screen on an iPhone or an iPad. So if you don't have an iPhone or an iPad, no big deal. You can just simulate it right on here and you'll be fine. But I think testing it on a physical device is not only gives you a much more tactile feel of how everything works, but you can also show that to friends and family when you go home later on the weekends, so you can sort of take your app and your skills with you. So that's why we're doing it on a physical device as opposed to a simulator. And then, of course, number 6 is growth mindset. So this can be tricky if you've never done this before. There's going to be some coding. There's going to be some concepts you've maybe never done, but that's okay. We've all had a first time for everything. We're going to get through it. You can post your questions and comments and frustrations below, and we'll help you out. We'll make another video or a few more just to explain a little better maybe something that you're stuck on. But don't worry, every time you build and it doesn't work, you'll learn something, right? Every failure is a chance to learn something new. So keep that growth mindset as you go through this. If you get frustrated, get up, walk around, take a deep breath, do something else, and come back. And you can always hit the pause button on this YouTube video and pick it up later. So, but keep that growth mindset. We're going to have fun doing this. And remember, at the end of this, you're going to be an iOS developer. And so just push through, and I think you'll be very successful and have a lot of fun. So here we go. I'm going to jump right in to Xcode. So down here, I'm going to pull up Xcode. And I kind of skipped the part of the book. So let's go to the book real quick. Right here, it gives you an overview. It tells you exactly what you're going to learn. And it breaks it down into the different parts. And again, we have a 5-part series that goes through all this in detail. If you want to watch that, that'll be linked. And then number 1, we just drop right in and we create our app. And so we are right here. And we create a new Xcode project using single view template. So let's go do that. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the book and Xcode. If you were doing this at home, you could possibly put the book on your iPad or on a different screen, or pull it up on another computer perhaps and have it side by side, but today we're going to be kind of flipping back and forth so I can show you on the screen what's happening. And I'm just going to use this Command Tab, so I'm going to Command Tab right over to Xcode. And what I'm going to do, I'll zoom in. You have your options right here. We want this middle one that says create a new Xcode project. So we're going to click on that. And then what comes up is this screen, and it gives you a number of templates, and it asks you what sort of device you're going to make this for. So the watch, the TV. We are making this for iOS, so this works on iPads, iPhones, iPod Touch, any iOS device. And then down here you have your choice over which sort of starting template you want to go with. So if you know you're building a game, you would go into game. If you knew you were building something for iMessage, you would start with there. We are doing single view application because this literally all exists within a single screen. So I'm going to go down here and click next. And then it asks us to give a name and fill out a little bit of information about what we're doing here. So the name is Color Mix. Now I'm going to call it Color Mix 3 because I've done this a few times and I don't want to sort of overwrite what's happening. So I call it Color Mix 3. You can just call it Color Mix. This is my personal team. This is my information here. Language. You want to do Swift. If it's on Objective-C, you're going to want to make sure you change that to Swift. We are writing Swift code today. So you're going to want to make sure that says Swift. And then down here, user interface. This is important because you have a couple choices here as well. There is Swift UI, which is brand new and really awesome. But we're following the book over here today for this color mixer app. And we don't necessarily want to deviate from the book. So we're going to make sure we use storyboards, okay? And you don't need to worry about core data or UI tests or unit tests. We are all good here, and I'm going to click the next button. Okay, now it's asking you where would you like to save this, and you do see this option, create a Git repository on your Mac. Don't worry about that. Figure out where you want to save it. I personally save it in a folder called Xcode Projects where I keep all my things for Xcode, but that's up to you where you want to put that. And of course, then you're going to go down here and hit the Create button. Okay, now what that does is tells Xcode to spin up a number of files over here on our left-hand side. This is the Xcode sort of interface, and we're going to be in here quite a bit today, so I'm going to stretch this to fill my screen. And if you look at my mouse here, over here on the left-hand side, this is what's called the Project Navigator. So these are going to be all the files that make up your app, sort of the bundle of files, right? And these were auto-created when we said we were making a single-view application. And over here in the middle then is some more just general information about our app. And of course, you don't have to worry about any of this. This is all, again, defaults are good. And then over here on the right-hand side, this pane right here is where we're going to see some attributes and make some changes to some of our switches and buttons and things. Okay. But if you've gotten this far, perfect. You've created a new project, you've given it a name, and we are ready to sort of build this project up. Let's go back to our book. And I'm going to skip through here. There we go. Name the app Color Mix. Using the project, open main.storyboard. And then right here on number 4, find a view in the object library. Okay. So let's go back over here. What they want us to do is we're going to do all of our work in one file called main.storyboard. And then we're going to write all of our code in another file. So what I want to do is show you and zoom in right here. You have a number of files along your left-hand side. This one very specifically is called main.storyboard. We're going to click on that. Then you'll notice what happens. Right in front of you is a blank iOS device. In this case, it's an iPhone 11. Perfect. Now, if you're using the simulator, if you do not have a device connected that you're working on, a physical device like this iPad, just leave it as this iPhone. You can build it right in here and follow along. But what I always do with students is make sure that the device they're using to connect with is the same on their screen. So if you have an iPad Air or an iPod Touch or whatever device you have connected, I like to match that. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can change what device you're building on. Okay, and let me pull up my mouse here. We're going to go down to the bottom, and I will zoom in for us. And right over here it says View As, and this is where you're telling Xcode what device you want to view and build. Now, eventually you're going to get into building an app that works on every single device, and so this is how you would check and make sure what device, make sure it looks good on all of them. But very specifically, make sure it matches what you're using. And so if you click on View as iPhone 11, you're going to see right away Apple has included every current model that you can write code for, and you can switch between those. So we have all the way up from the brand new iPad Pros all the way down to the smallest one, which I think is an iPhone 4S. So you are making an app, you want to make sure it looks good on every single device. In this case, I'm going to match my iPad. This is an iPad Pro 12-inch. So let's look through here. There's an iPad 10-inch, 10.5, 12.9. That's the iPad I'm using here. So I'm going to click on that iPad. Now you'll notice on the screen, boom, it changed from an iPhone to a big white square. That's actually an iPad. I'm going to use my fingers to pinch, and that's going to sort of zoom a little bit. There we go. And so there's the iPad screen. That, of course, is the iPad going up and down. I am developing the app. The students are developing the app with their iPad in this orientation, which would be landscape. We are in portrait, so let's change that as well. Down here at the bottom, it says orientation. I'm sorry, I'll zoom into that. And we're going to switch it over here to landscape. And you should see right away on your screen, it switches what you're seeing. So now the screen matches the device I'm using. So go ahead and take a second to find your device that you're using and make sure it matches up. That way what you build on the screen should look exactly what happens over here. And that's important for students to see that one-to-one, what you see is what you get happening. So there we go. We are in main.storyboard again, and we have pulled up this screen of our iPad. Now the next step, it said, is we need to grab a view, and that's from the object library. Okay, and again, I'm going to go back to the book real quick. It says find a view in the object library. Remember, you can use the filter field. Okay, so the object library is, again, I'm right here in the middle of the screen. Follow my mouse. I'm going to go up, then I'm going to go over to the right, and you're going to see this plus button. I'll zoom into that for you. All right, when you highlight over that plus button, you see it gives you the tooltip library. This is perfect. We are going to click on this library. And what happens here is you have tons of different things you can add. We're going to be adding a switch, a slider. This one is called a view. So to make it easier, to narrow it down, it says you can type in view. All right. And it gives you all the different views you can add. And we're going to scroll down here, and there's one that is simply called view. There's no words before or after. It's simply view. It's called a UIView, User Interface View. And what we need to do is we need to drag it from this floating window and drop it onto our iPad screen right here. All right, so I'm going to click and drag and then drop it. Now, before you drop it, and if you already have, no big deal, you can pick it back up. You'll notice that as I move it around, it gives me these sort of horizontal and vertical guide arrow lines. And these lines are going to help you sort of place it right in the middle of what your device is. And so I placed it right in the middle of the screen. But what I'm going to do is move it up a little bit higher right there. And you can see here on my finished app, that's where I have the UIView is right there at the top of the screen. Okay, so let's go back to our book, and I believe our book is going to tell us this. So it says drag the view onto the view controller. Use the guides to align it. So again, depending if you're using the iPad screen or the iPhone screen here, you're going to want to align your square. And again, I just moved it right up here at the top. I'm going to just kind of let go right there. There it is. Easy. Now it says a white view on a white background is hard to see. Choose Editor, Canvas, Show Bounds to display an outline. So I've already done that, and what they're talking about is if I click off of my UI view here, it still leaves a blue square around it, right? It's possible if this is your first time using Xcode that yours does not have a blue line around it, and therefore you have a white square on a white background. That makes it very difficult to see. You kind of got to click around to find it again. And so what they're telling you is you can turn on this blue outline. It's not on by default. And so I'm going to show you where that is. Let's refer to the book one more time, and it says choose Editor, Canvas, Show Bounds, Rectangles. Okay. So again, what they're telling you is to go up here to the top of the screen and go over to this Editor menu, right? And then over here under Canvas, you can check or uncheck the things you want to see. Bounds, rectangles. Now, as you can see, I already have it checked. So you would want to check that to get that blue square around there. All right. Boom. There we go. Now it says open the Assistant Editor by going to View, Assistant Editor, Show Assistant Editor. So what we're going to do is start to write a little bit of code. So we've built the very first piece of the UI, the user interface. Now we need to put in a line or two of code to start to build this, to tell this square what to do, right? So what you need to do is pull up the Assistant Editor. And what that's going to do is it's going to add one more chunk, one more pane to Xcode. So you're going to have kind of a lot going on, but this will be the last one that we add. And so again, I'm going to go up here to this editor window. All right. And right here it says Assistant, and that's what you're going to want to hit. Of course, you could hit, what is that? Control, Option, Command, Enter to pull that up. That's probably a key command that you're going to get to know a lot if you start to code a lot in Xcode. So we're going to go Editor, Assistant. And now what has happened is you see over here, the code has appeared. And this is the ViewController.swift file. And that's, again, right over here on your left-hand side. But what it's doing is it's putting it right beside your user interface, because what we need to do is start connecting our switches and buttons to actual code. So when I hit this button, the code knows what to do to turn this red or green or blue. In order to make that really easy, you want both of them side by side. So that's what we just did, is we opened up that Assistant Editor. And what I like to do with my mouse, and I'll zoom in here, is I like to do a little bit of like efficiency sort of cleanup. And so what I like to do is move this pane over and start to sort of tighten this up as best I can. You know, you have a lot of ability to sort of create your interface. And so I'm going to pull this over. I'm going to pull this over a little bit. And let's see if we can't pull this. That's as far as that one goes. All right. We don't want to hide it. All right, good. And we can probably condense our code here a little bit too. And then again, I'm going to pinch with my fingers because I like to have my whole iPad on the screen. All right, so this is the sort of ideal setup for me, where I can sort of see everything all at once. And again, this is a 15-inch MacBook screen. The bigger the screen, the better. I personally like coding on a big iMac screen because it just helps you see everything all at once. So do a little bit of window voodoo here to get everything just right, and we're going to start writing a little bit of code. Okay, so let's go back to our book, and we opened the assistant editor, and now it says to control drag from the view into the code. So this is a concept that it's really hammering in chapter 17, and that's what's called actions and outlets. And that's connecting your user interface elements to your code and vice versa. So what they're saying is to make that connection between your user interface and your code, you need to control drag from the view to the code. And here's what they mean by that. On a Macintosh mouse, you normally only have one button. So to get the right click, you need to hold control. If you happen to be using a Mac with a 2-button mouse or a trackpad, you can also do what we're about to do by using 2 fingers. That simulates a right click. So 2 fingers on your trackpad. Or if you have a mouse with multiple buttons like I do plugged in, you can just right click. But for those of you that don't, again, you hold the control button, and then we're going to click and drag. And I'm going to zoom in and show you what that means. So here you see our code, and here you see our UI elements. And I'm going to click on this view that we just made. And I need to connect this view over to my code. And again, to do that is I'm on the keyboard, I'm going to hold the control button, click, and then drag. And what you see happens is this blue connector line. Perfect. What we need to do is then tell it where we want to drop that into our code. And I like to kind of keep all my actions outlets together in one spot. So I'm going to pop it down here like on line 17, 18, right there. Okay. Now when you let go, so when you control drag, decide where you want it and let go, pops up this window here. And it's asking you to give it some information about what this connection is. So first it asks you, is this an outlet? Of course, it's an outlet. Give it a name. Now, the book tells you what to name it, and that's important because if you're following the book, it's going to refer to this multiple times. So you want to make sure that you use the same name as the book. So let's go back to our book, and let's double check what it wants us to call it. It says number 9 here, enter ColorView in the name field, and click connect. And you'll notice that the V in view is capitalized, ColorView. That's camel case, which means you don't really use spaces a lot when you name things in code. So to separate words, instead of a space, you use capital letters, and it makes it easier to read. So I'm going to zoom in here one more time. And so here we are under name, and it says to call it ColorView. Okay. It is a UIView, a user interface view, and we're going to click connect. And you'll see when we do that, the computer writes code for us. Our first line of code was actually like generated for us, right? It's got this little circle here, and this is called like the gutter where these numbers are. And when you highlight your mouse, it should highlight what this is connected to, and it says this is an interface builder outlet. And so this over here is your interface builder. We're building the user interface. This is your interface builder outlet. We have a variable here. We named it ColorView, and it is a user interface view. So, perfect. Make sure that this circle is filled in, and when you highlight it, it highlights. That's how you're going to check your connections and your outlets. So, perfect. We've made our first sort of big milestone here, which is this outlet. Awesome. Let's go back to our book. Okay, number 9, we did that. Let's skip on. And then it tells you what you're seeing, the circle, the UIView, all of that. Now, it's going to have you, some of the steps it has you do are sort of written into paragraphs. So I'm going to sort of highlight those and pull those out for us. So right here, it says, find the function. I'll highlight that for you. find the function ViewDidLoad. Add the following code inside the function. Okay. So we're going to go back to our Xcode, and it says find the function ViewDidLoad. So let's zoom into our code over here. And there it is. And again, you can sort of read through this code. If you want to start up here at line 1, it gives you the name of the app you're working on, some copyright information. It's importing the user interface kit, which is Apple's sort of pre-built user interface objects. It's telling you we're using a ViewController, which is what we're looking at. And then right here, function ViewDidLoad. So this is the very first thing that happens when you load your app. And any code that we put in here is going to be the very first code that runs when your app runs. And so the book is telling us right away that we need to put some code into this function. So this function ViewDidLoad. And again, it has these parentheses and these brackets. So what's important is the parentheses denote it's a function. The brackets are what steps run when the function gets run. So what that means is anything within these brackets, the computer or the iOS device is going to run first. So we need to add some code within these brackets. And it tells you right here, this is a comment, do any additional setup after loading the view. So I like to keep the comments in there. I'm not a big fan of erasing comments. There's no need to. So what I do is click my mouse here and hit enter to just drop down and give myself a clean line to start writing some code on. Okay. And it tells us what that code should be. So I'm going to go back to my book again and we're going to zoom in. And it says, here's the code. Add the following code inside the function. ColorView dot background color equals black. So let's kind of just read this in English. So ColorView we know is this square, we just named that ColorView. It's a UIView. Dot background color. So that's one of its properties. ColorView has a property called background color. What color do you want that to be? Black. So we're saying the ColorView background color equals should be black. Okay. Right now, as you know, it's white. That's why we put the border on it to help us see it, because it's a white square on a white background. So we're going to help pull that out by contrasting it and making it black. Now, this is where I challenge students every time to type the code in and not just copy paste this. It would be really easy to take your mouse right here and just copy, go over to your code, hit paste. But then you're not actually writing the code and getting that muscle memory and seeing what happens when you write that code. So I challenge you to type this in even though it's right there. And here's how I kind of make it easier for myself. I pull up, let me zoom in. If you move your mouse to the bottom of your Xcode window, right down here, you get this little arrow. You can kind of pull this up and see what's behind it. So you can kind of sneak this up a little bit and see your book back there. And of course, there's your code. Now, if you have your code, or I'm sorry, if you have your book on a separate device, like over here, you can obviously reference that. But this is how I do it when it's on the same device here. So I'm going to sneak my Xcode up a little bit. I can see this code, and this is what we need to type in. So I'm going to go up here. I'm on line 16. So again, make sure you're within the brackets of this function. Okay. And let's start typing it. So ColorView. Now you see what happens is it has this autocomplete feature like your email or web browser. As I start to type, Xcode's trying to guess and make it easier for me and quicker to write code by guessing what I'm about to type. And so you can see here, it knows I'm going to say ColorView. It knows that's an object that I've created. So I could stop here, and of course, I could click that and it'll fill it in for me. So that's, you know, autocomplete. You've probably seen that before in other apps. And so that's what's happening there, is it puts all that on the screen. So you see ColorView, then the period, then background. And because obviously color is another word, we're going to capitalize the C. Background color, space, equals space dot black. Okay, so color view background color equals black. Awesome. We wrote our first line of code. So up until this point, the computer has been writing all the code for us based on what we do, but we actually wrote our own first line of code. So congratulations, you've written your first line of code. We're about to test out and see if this code works or not. Because I typed it in, it has two things I want to show you. It has obviously color coded some of this, and we can go deeper into that in another video of what each color sort of is denoting and what that means. But if you typed this in wrong or had a problem with it, there would be a big sort of exclamation point. So for example, let's say I spelled background color wrong, right? Two things happened. Number one is it lost all of its colors because it's not really sure what I just typed. I'm not referencing, I'm referencing a background color, right? It doesn't know what that is. It's not sure. And right up here, you get this sort of stop sign with an exclamation point. That means there is an error in your code, and it's letting you know what line of code your error is on. You can imagine if you're up to a couple hundred lines of code, it's going to be important to know where those errors are. So it puts up this little stop sign right here and says, hey, you have an error. Okay. I wanted to show you real quick before we go further. Up here is the pane that sort of goes to the bottom. It's called the debug area. I have that turned off, but I'm going to turn that on. So I'm going to turn that on. And again, this is how you turn sort of your panes on and off, your interface here. But I'm going to turn that on. Down here is our debug area. And so if we click on this square right here, it's going to tell us, sorry, if we click on our error stop sign, it's going to tell us what the errors are. Essentially, it doesn't know what we typed. It doesn't know what a background color is, and so we've really thrown a loop into it. So we can look at this and be like, oh, I spelled it wrong. Let me put a U in here. Background color. And then boom, two things happened. It found its colors again because it now knows that it's a good line of code, and we lost our stop sign over here. So there's no more errors in our code. So that is really important to see as you're typing this in or following along with the video. It's possible that you accidentally hit a letter and type something wrong, and that's how that error will show up. So pause the video, go back, fix what you can. If not, remember you can use @TechTeacherSup on Twitter to ask for help or use the comments below. So let's go back to our book. I think this is going to be our first build and run. So remember, number 5 over here is we're going to do some building, then we're going to test it, then we're going to write some more code and test it. You don't want to sort of do the whole app all at once before you test it, because there may be a problem way back in like step 2 and you're going to have to undo everything. So always just build a little bit, test, build, test, and that's kind of the loop we're going to get in here. So I'm going to go to the next page, and then it says, oh, it's essentially telling you what you just did. Okay. And then right here it says it's time to build and run, and they talk about the simulator. So let's show you what that means. So we are ready to test this app. We should see the square turn black on our screen because that's what we told it to do. So follow my mouse up here in the upper left-hand corner of Xcode. You have this play button. And if you hover over it, it says build and run your current scheme. So it's saying to compile all of your code and run it on your device. And what device it is going to run on is over here. Right here it's saying it's going to run it on what's called the simulator. So it's going to simulate an iPhone SE right on my MacBook screen. I need to change that though. I want to send it over to my iPad. So I'm going to click on this, and here's all your different options. OS version lower. My iPad needs iOS 13.5. You'll probably run into this because Xcode is sort of the bleeding edge of coding for these devices. When Apple releases a new device or a new version of iOS or a new version of macOS or a new version of Xcode, you got to make sure everything's up to date. Clearly, my iPad is does not have the update that came out just this week, but my Xcode has been updated. So it's telling me there's kind of a mismatch there. Let's see what happens. I'm going to hit build and run. Okay. I might be able to fix this on the fly here. What I'm going to do is highlight my color mix app file, and this gives me some information about my app. I'm on the general tab, and again we called it color mix 3, but if we go down here it says target and device, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Target iOS 13.5. Well, Xcode is telling me my iPad is on iOS 13.4, so let's drop that down to 13.4. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you're building a real app, but if you need to make this change so you don't have to wait an hour for your iPad to update, because we don't have time to do that on a live stream, that's how you change it. So I'm going to say, no, this actually can work on 13.4 as well. And then you'll notice up here, Chris's iPad is now an available device to send that over to. So thank you for your patience while we made that change. Let's go back to where we were, and I'm going to hit run. Okay, right here in the middle, it's giving me some information about what's happening. It's compiling the code, it's building it, it's sending it over, and we have a success. If you look at the screen, this is now color mix 3. So this is the first build of the app that we just wrote. Perfect. We said, hey, make this square a black background. Boom, there it is. Congratulations. You built the first part of a user interface. You wrote your first line of code. You created an outlet so the code actually updates back to the interface that you built. And then you went and tested it on a device or on your simulator. Whoa, that is awesome. So congratulations. We now obviously have to start adding in some buttons and switches and sliders so we can make this thing change colors. But congratulate yourself for getting this far. This is a lot of work to get here. And so, all right, here we go. On to the next part. What this does in the book is tell you about some errors that you may see. But we don't have errors. Skip this. Right here, creating actions. Okay, so now we wrote some code that updated our screen, which was an outlet, but now we need to do an action, which means when you click something, when you perform an action, something should happen. And so not only do we have to build, as you can see on the screen, a switch, so we can click a switch, but when we click that switch, we want something to happen. So that's called an action. So here we go. It says in Xcode, open main.storyboard. That's where we're at. And then it says find a switch in the object library, drag it onto the scene, and center it. Let's go. Okay, so let me kind of scrunch my code up here. Okay, so it says we need to add a switch. And so again, remember, we go up here to this object library, hit that. I'm going to type in switch. There it is. And we're going to grab that and drag it onto our view. And remember, we can use that sort of guide to help us. So let's just drop it right there. I'll zoom in for you. There is our switch. And as you can see, the switch is already on. It's turned on already. What the book wants you to do is tell that switch to be off. So if you imagine when your app first starts, you want all of your switches and sliders to be off, and then the user can start turning them on and messing with them. But you don't want your app to start up with like the things already turned on. So we need to tell this switch to be in the off mode. And the way we do that is called attributes. So I am going to click on my switch to highlight it, to let Xcode know that's what I want to change. And then I'm going to go over here with my mouse to the right and up. Make sure you have this turned on, and you should see this little sort of arrow. That's called the attributes. And what it should be are sort of all the properties of this switch. And so you can go through and see that you have a lot of control over how this switch looks and behaves. The very first one, though, is the one we want right away. It says state. What state should this start in? It's on. Well, we want that to start off. All right. And boom, as soon as we do that, if we look over here at our switch, it is now in the off position, not the on position. Perfect. So make sure you make that change so your switch starts off. Okay, now it says control drag from the switch into the code file. And again, we're on number 5 here. So we're going to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we need to do another one of those control drags from the switch to the code and then release. And this time we're going to choose action, not outlet. So it's like the opposite of action. It's an action that we're performing. Then we need to give that action a name. So it's going to be called switch changed. And we need to tell it it's a UI switch. And it gives you a view of what that should look like. Awesome. So let's do that. So in Xcode, we need to control click or right click and make this connection. So I'm going to click on my switch. I'm going to hold control on my mouse and click and drag over. And let's just drop this guy right under the one we just made. And right here, it is an action. It is called switch changed. And remember to capitalize the C because that's a separate word. And right here where it says type, we want to make sure it's a UI switch. All right, and click connect. And then boom, the computer wrote some more code for you. It says this is an action, and we wrote a new function called switch changed, which means each time we click that switch, it's going to send over sort of a signal that that's been done. And as you can imagine, we're going to write some code in here and say, what do we do when we switch that? So make sure you control click over, build that action, give it the name switch changed, and make sure that code shows up. And again, it looks just like that. You can reference your book. We're going to go on to the next page, and it shows you exactly what code it creates. And it gives you a little bit of detail about what's exactly those things are called and why it's happening. And then right down here, it says to add the following code inside that function, that method. ColorView dot background color equals dot red. So again, if we can read this just sort of in English, what it's saying is when I click that button, it's going to run this code. So click the button, run this code. ColorView background color. So we know that we're going to change the background color of this view to red. Okay. So essentially what we're saying is when we click this button, turn that square red. Awesome. So we need to add this code, ColorView dot background color equals red, inside this new method here. So let's go back to Xcode and let's pull up this new action we just created. And we're going to go inside the brackets. I'm going to hit enter to sort of create a little space here. And we're going to say ColorView, right? Dot background color equals red. All right, so when this switch is changed, turn it red. Let's go. Now it says checkpoint, build and run your app. Now this is kind of important because it's going to tell you what you should see. So when you turn the switch on, it should go to red. But when you turn it off, it stays red, right? Because all we said was when that switch changes, turn red. So that doesn't denote between changing from on to off or off to on. So each time we hit that button, it's going to turn red. So there's really no way to turn it not red once we run this code. But of course, it's going to tell you how you can do that. But let's check and build and run our app. Make sure we can turn our square red over here. All right. So again, I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to hit build and run. It sort of kills the app and then runs the new version. And it may be a little hard to see, but there is a switch in here now. And it has successfully sent over to my iPad. If we did it right, when I hit the switch, that box should turn red. Let's test it. Yes. All right. So our code worked. Our box turned red. If I hit that switch again to turn off, as you can see, it stays red. And that's what we just explained, was that the code doesn't know if you're turning it on or off or off or on. But if you can get your box to turn red here, awesome. Another successful checkpoint. And congratulate yourself, because you have not only done an outlet, but now an action with a switch. And this again is why I love building this app, is because students and teachers who are building this app and people can actually interact with their device and see changes happen. It's just different when you do it on the screen with the simulator, because then you have to use your mouse. You can't obviously touch your screen. It's not a touch screen. So that's why I do that, is to make that connection. You can actually touch your screen and see it happen. So congratulations. Let's go back and we're going to fix the code so we can actually turn this from black to red and red to black. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my book here. Let's pull this up. And it says, to make the switch behave like a real switch, delete the line you added and add the following code. Okay. So it's saying, I know you just wrote some code, but get rid of it and put this in instead. And what this is an if-else statement, and it explained this in more detail earlier in the book. But essentially what it's saying is, and we can read this in English, if sender, which is the switch, if the switch is on, make the background color red. Else, make it black. Because a switch only has two states, and again, they tell you that's a Boolean property, true or false, on or off. Because this switch can only be one of two things, you can use an if-else statement. So we're going to write this code, and it says we have to delete our old code and write this code, okay? And so if we want to do what we did before, we can sort of move this down here, and then we can go over to Xcode, and we can kind of pull this up. That way we can see it. And then I want to zoom in a little bit for us so we can see all of it at once. There we go. So here's that line of code I just wrote. ColorView background color equals .red. We're going to delete that. We want to put this in instead. So if sender is capital O on, right? If the switch is on, and then we need to put a bracket. So hold shift and hit, you want the curly bracket, not the straight bracket next to the P button. So if sender is on, and then let's hit enter. Here's what's going to happen. ColorView. Whoa, see, now I hit caps lock and I started typing in all caps. Crazy. So background color equals red. Awesome. So if our button is on, turn red. Now I'm going to come out of this bracket. I'm going to hit enter to create a new line. Now we're going to write the else statement. Else, so if it's not on, right, what should happen? ColorView background color equals black. All right. And the reason that .black dropped down is because I've sort of shrunk my code. If your code screen is wider, that'll all stay on one line. So there we did. We just replaced our code with an if-else statement. So instead of our switch just turning it on and leaving it there, we can now have a true on-off switch. And again, it kind of explains that's a Boolean property, which is a fancy term for saying one or the other. Okay, so let's test that. So we're going to go back to our Xcode. I'm going to bring my screen down here. Let's test this button to see if we did this right. So we got red, black, black. Yes. Congratulations. We have successfully deleted code that you wrote and changed it to be more efficient and actually work. So not only does the button on turn it to red, but the button off turns it back to black. So congratulations. We got a little more advanced there with our code. It looks great. Let's add a couple more switches. So let's go back to our book. Here we go. Multiple actions and outlets. So this is where we're going to start adding some more things. And we're going to go to number 1 right here, and it says open code, Xcode, go to main storyboard. And I'll just highlight this for us here. It says select your switch and type Command D to duplicate the switch. Drag it underneath. Repeat to add a third one. And then Control drag to create outlets for each of them. That's a lot of steps right there, but essentially we need to create our other 2 buttons. There's going to be a total of 3, and we need to create outlets for those. So again, we have actions and outlets. Outlets means when we switch our button on or off, we are not only performing an action, but then the code needs to send some things back. So we're going to create an outlet as well. So let's do it. So what it said to do is grab your switch here. So make sure your switch is highlighted. And then it says hit Command D to duplicate it. So holding the command button on your keyboard and hitting D, what you'll see is it created another switch, but it just kind of stuck it on top of the first one. That's not very efficient. We can't do that, switch both of them. We need to move this. And again, as we move it, we get that vertical sort of guide bar here. And so decide where you want your button. And if the cool part with this app is once you get good and build it, you can completely change your interface. If you want your switches to be on the left and your UIView to be on the right, you don't have to center it if you don't want. This is where students can add their own personal flair to the app. But I'm going right by the book, so let's do it the way the book does. But as a teacher, this is where I love to give students the ability to just get wild with their interface, right? Okay. So we've created our second switch. We need to do a third one. So again, I'll click this one here, Command D, duplicate, and let's move that one down. So we should have a total of 3 switches. The order it wants you to go in is RGB, red, green, blue. Red switch, green switch, blue switch. So that's what we're gonna name these switches. And I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit here. Let's go to our book, because again, right here on number 6, it wants us to create these outlets and call them red switch, green switch, blue switch. Okay, so we need to control drag from each switch and create some outlets. And to do that, I'll zoom in for you here. So let's go to this first switch. And again, I'm going to hold control. I'm going to drag over. We can just pop this right up here. And it says, hey, you're making an action. No, we're making an outlet. So make sure you choose outlet here. Change that. We need to give it a name. And we're going to call this red switch. Connect. We got to do that. So we're going to go to this switch here. Control drag over. I like to keep those in order so you can kind of tuck that in under the red switch. Remember, this is an outlet, and this is going to be called blue, or sorry, this is going to be called green switch. Red, green, blue, RGB, green switch, connect. And then let's grab this switch, control drag over. Oh, you know what? I'm going to cancel that because I kind of put it out of order. I like to put it right under that one. Okay. And again, it's an outlet. And this is our BLUE, blue switch. Okay. Boom. So right here, we have our 1, 2, 3 outlets. Of course, there's the 4th outlet for the ColorView. So you should have a total of 4 outlets. All right. Now you may wonder why you didn't actually have to create an action for each button. And the book goes into detail, but because when we duplicated those buttons, what we are essentially saying is that each button is just an on-off switch. We already wrote the code once. Let's just copy paste that. So this action right here, switch changed, you'll notice when we highlight that with our mouse, it highlights all 3 buttons. That's where that duplicate sort of came in handy, because it duplicated the behavior of that first button and applied it to the other 2. So, and again, you can highlight these sort of little circles here in your gutter, and it will show you what UI object you are either doing an action or an outlet on. Awesome. So here we go. We have our 3 switches. We have our 3 outlets. And of course, we know that all of them go right to that action. So let's go back to our book. We can go on to the next page. And now again, it's kind of talking about these connections a little bit more, and it's showing you this connections window. So I'll show you this really quick. If you look at my mouse here in the middle of the screen, we're going to go over to the right, and we're going to go up. And now we normally have known this as our attributes pane, but if we slide over here 2 dots, it says show 2 icons. It says show the connections inspector. And so what that does is when I click on one of my UI elements here, it will show me over here what outlet and what action those are connected to. So as you're building more switches, buttons, and sliders, it's helpful to be able to maybe come in here sometimes and look and make sure everything's connected just right. Obviously, it can get a little overwhelming when you have a lot more elements on the screen. We're going to have a total of 7, so that's getting up there. So that's kind of what the book is explaining right here, is where you can go and see where those happen. Okay. I want to go to the next step. So this is all kind of just explaining that actions and outlets connections here, giving you sort of a different way to do it. And then we're going to skip down to this paragraph because it's giving us some new code that we need to write. So it says, now that you've created the user interface and connected all the outlets and actions, which we just did, we need to write some code. So it says the action method is not the best place to update the color of the view. So that code we just wrote with the Ifelse statement is saying it's probably not the best place to put that code. There's already some repeated code in the file. The color is set to black in the view did load, and again on the switch turn off. So what's kind of telling you is if we were to really look at our code, we're telling the square here to turn black twice, which is inefficient. If we can delete one of those and tell it to only turn black once, that's much more efficient. Each time it runs through, it doesn't need to do something twice, just once. So we're going to change that. And it tells you right here, it says a better design is to create a single function that makes the correct color based on the state of each switch. And then to call this both from that action method, switch changed, and from view did load. That way there's no repeated logic. Okay, so because these switches are red, green, and blue, depending on which ones are on or off, that square is going to change. What it's telling us is to write that code and make it efficient and not have to do it twice. All right, so let's look over here and it's going to pull this up. So we are going to write our first new function. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in real quick here. because we can kind of talk about what's happening. So we're going to write a new function, and it's called update color. And whenever we refer to this, we can just say run update color. Well, what does update color do? So inside the brackets is the sort of steps of code that it does. And so it's saying, look at these switches and figure out if they're on or off, and then change the square to that color. So is the red switch on? Is the green switch on? Is the blue switch on? If so, add either red, green, or blue to the square, and then make that the color. So now that we have 3 different switches that do 3 different colors, we need to sort of update our code to reflect that. So this is the code that we're going to type in to our Xcode. And again, remember, you don't want to just copy paste this. It's better to type it out. So I'm going to reference that. Remember, function update color. So let's go back to our Xcode. Let me pull this up here. And so what I'm going to do is go to line 17 right after our ViewDidLoad function. I'm going to hit enter twice, create a little breathing room there, and here we go. So function, which is func, update, capital C, color, and then these parentheses. So we started a function, we gave that function a name, and here's what happens when it's run. So we put that bracket in, and now we have our brackets. So we're going to start with this red switch. Let's look back at our code. It says variable red CG float equals 0. CG float is a fancy name for a decimal. You're going to see as you move your sliders and sort of mix your colors, you need a value between 0 and 1. 0.25, 0.57, 0.73, right? If we just did 0 or 1, it would be either nothing or full color. So what it's saying is let's establish a range using a decimal, and it can be somewhere between 0 and 1. So our red, green, and blue switches here. I'm going to highlight this. This is where we're at. So we're going to say variable red decimal 0. All right. So here I am in my code right here. I'm going to take VAR, which is short for variable, red, colon, CG float, there it is, equals 0. So let me zoom into this for you. All right, variable red CG float equals 0. Now this is, it looks like an error, but it's more of a caution. It's saying this code is gonna work, but you haven't written all of the code yet. So it's telling you that like there's probably more code coming. I get it, but just be careful here. So don't worry if you get the yellow sort of caution sign. That's a lot better than getting the red exclamation point that there's a true error. Okay. Now we need to do that for the next switch, which is green. And we're going to say that can also be a decimal point. It started at 0. This variable is blue. And that should also be a decimal point starting at 0. Okay. Now what we need to tell, looking at our code over here, is we need the app to look at our buttons and figure out if they're on or off, and then to either add or not add that color to the square. So it says if the red switch is on, turn red from nothing, 0, to full red. Okay. So let's go back to our code and do that. And we're going to do that for the green and the blue switch as well. And then we'll get down here to this variable. So if red switch is on, red equals 1. So let's go over here. If red switch dot is on, right? If red switch is on, red equals 1. So let's just double check. If red switch is on, red equals 1. So let's do that for the green and the blue. So let's go out of this red switch set of brackets. If green switch is on, well, what do we do if green switch is on? We make that box green. Awesome. If the blue switch is on, what should we do? Blue should appear. All right. That is perfect. Speaking of caps lock, is this code case sensitive? Someone had a question. Yes, code is very case sensitive. If you were to not capitalize, for example, the S on blue switch, because you called it blue switch with a capital S. So if I called this blue switch with a lowercase s, it doesn't know what that is, and it gives me the stop sign error, bad error. What is blue switch? I don't know that. I know blue switch with a capital S, and now we're good. So coding is very case sensitive, and that's the reason that you sort of capitalize the first letter of each new word, is to help you sort of separate words. But again, if you use the capital letter here, you have to use it over there, and everywhere in your code has to match. So that is important. Okay, thank you for the question. And again, we have our chat running, so if you're watching and you have questions, you can type it right in, and we will figure that out. So now what we need to do is we need to add these colors together. So it figured out which switches are on or off, red, green, and blue. Maybe the red one's on and the blue one's on, but the green one's not. So we would have to add red and blue, right? So we need to add in the colors that are currently on and take away the colors that are off. So let's look back at our code here. This is what we're doing. We're making a new variable called color, and we're going to say let that color equal the red, green, and blue added together. And this is an alpha channel, and that's set at 1. And the color view background color equals that color. So again, what we're saying is add the red, green, and blue based on which switch is on or off, and give me that color. And we know, for example, yellow and blue makes green. Green and blue, depending on what you add, you can get purple, right? So we'll see. We'll check this out. So let color equal UI color, add those together. Now again, if that's a lot to sort of remember our trick. We can sneak this kind of down here, and then we can go back to Xcode and we can sneak that up. And then I'll zoom in so we can see that. Okay. So let's create a new line and let's type that in. Let color, now remember that's a lowercase color, we're creating that, equal UI color. And then what is that? Well, that's parentheses. We need to add these things together. So we need to add red. Take the red. Is it on or off? We need to add green. Look at green. Is that on or off? Blue. Look at blue. Is that on or off? And then add that up. All right. Perfect. And as we can see after that parentheses there, we're going to give this a name. We're going to say ColorView background color equals this. Awesome. Now that's one of the bigger chunks of code we're going to write today. But again, try not to copy paste that and type it in. If you get any errors, you can reference back. Maybe you spelled something wrong or there's a bracket missing. So remember, double check and make sure you don't have any errors or sort of exclamation points show up, and you should be good. Okay. Now let's go back here. Let's get our book back on the screen. And again, it tells you what happens. It starts with those 3 variables and it checks them and it adds those together. Now it says finally a color is created and the color view is set. So I'm assuming they want us to build and run and test this, but we have to call this method. So we created this method, but we have to tell the app when to run it. And I'm assuming it should run that right away. So it says to update, remove the code that was setting the color and replace it with a single line update color. Okay, so this is tricky here. It says to update our switch changed action. Whenever we click a switch, we're going to delete the code that's in there and replace it with this new function we wrote, update color. So let's do that. Okay, so it's saying right here, here's that action. When our switch is changed, set it to red or black. Well, we don't want it to set to red or black anymore. We want to set it to what buttons are on or off. So we need to delete this code. I know this is the second time we've deleted code, but that's okay, because we're going to replace it with something much better. Get out of here. And now it's one simple line. Update color. There we go. So when our switch is changed, it's going to update color. What's update color? That's going to take all of the buttons and decide if they're on or off and give you a color. Awesome. So that's obviously more efficient. One line of code instead of an if-else statement that is 6 lines of code, right? So when you look at an app that's fast and one that's slow, that's probably the difference, is it's churning through a bunch of junky code that it doesn't need. So we're just trying to make this more efficient, make this fast and quick. Okay, so let's look at our book. And it looks like we've got to put our update color in one more time. From view did load, remove the line that was setting the color and replace it with update color. Okay, so if we look up here, remember we wrote, this is like our first line of code. When the app starts and loads up, set this square to black. Well, let's not do that anymore. Let's set that square to just whatever the buttons are. Update color. All right, awesome. Let's try it. Let's build and run this thing. So again, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hit build and run. And then let's look over at our iPad. Well, that's success. We have the 3 buttons, or the 3 switches here. Let's click this. We got red. Good. That's the green, but it's added with the red, so we get a yellow. In fact, if we turn off the red, we should just have green. Let's add some blue to that. And again, we get kind of that tech teacher support teal there. But if we turn that off, we should get our royal blue. So it's like system blue. If we turn all 3 on, of course, we know that if you add all the colors together, it gets white. And if you subtract all of the colors, you get black. Awesome. But as you can see, there's only really a combination of a few different colors you can get here. What we're going to do is we're going to add in some sliders here so we can give even more finite control over just the right purple that we want. Because it's either like this purple or no purple. But if we want like a darker shade of purple, we should have a slider here to give us that control. But hey, let me tell you something. The fact you have 3 switches, you have the outlets updating based on the code that you wrote, based on the switches that you have switched. Holy smokes, that is awesome. So congratulate yourself. That is a ton of skills, a ton of hard work. If you ran into some errors and fixed it, if you had any questions and something's just not working, remember, post in the comments or post at Tech Teacher Sup and we'll figure it out. But congratulations. We just keep getting further and further into this app and it keeps getting better and better. So let's keep going. Let's add some sliders in here. This is awesome. Let's go back to our book. So it says build and run, hit the switches, it should mix together. And that's just what happened. Congratulations. We are on to the sliders. So this is page 129, 17.4. We've been at this for about an hour and 20 minutes. So Thank you very much for sticking around. If you needed to pause it and come back the next day or whatever it may be, thanks for hanging out with us and building an app. So we are going to add our sliders now. And as you can see, each switch has a slider next to it. And we're going to have to kind of make some room because right now our switches are right in the middle of the screen. But we want to put the sliders beside it and kind of move that over. And again, that's interface building, right? This is where, again, I love to have students decide, do they want a switch and a slider vertically, horizontally? Where do they want to put these things? We're going to go along with the book, like I said, but this is a chance for students to personalize their app and change the way it kind of looks. So here's what we need to do. We're going to follow the steps. Number 1, it says select the switches by shift clicking each one or dragging a box. Drag them over to the left. And then create a little bit of breathing room between them. And then we're going to add our sliders. Okay. So essentially what it's saying is you could move one of your sliders and then select the other one and try to match that up, right? But it's much easier to move all 3 of them at the same time. And to do that, you can drag a box around all 3 of them. Or what it said is shift click, which means click on one of them, hold down shift, and then click on the other ones you want to move. Now, at that point, you can use the arrow key on your keyboard, and you can move those over. You can also take your mouse, and you can move those over, right? Let's pick a spot about right here. And if we want that middle switch, it's telling us we can center right in the middle of our screen. So that's pretty cool. Now in the book, it does tell you to try to put a little bit of room between them. I mean, we're on an iPad. We have a gigantic screen. Our finger has no problem hitting those buttons. But if you find that those switches are too close together, you can always, again, like it said, give those a little bit of breathing room, right, between each other. Spread those out a little bit. Make sure that when the user goes to tap it, there's no way they're gonna accidentally tap one of the other buttons or switches. All right, now we need to go to our sliders. So it says find a slider in the object library and drag it onto the scene. Repeat this. So each switch has a slider next to it. Awesome. So again, we know that we take our mouse up to the top of the screen here, and we click on this plus to get our object library. And what we're looking for is a slider, and there it is. We're going to grab that slider, we're going to pull it out onto our screen, and as you can see, it's going to try to align that vertically and horizontally with our switch there. So I'm just going to drop it in, and let me zoom in and show you kind of what that looks like. Okay. And of course, we need to do that 2 more times. So hit that plus again, grab your slider, and as you can see, it's going to line that up for us, and then 1 more time. Okay. Perfect. And let's look at that. All right, we have all 3 sliders right next to our switches. Perfect. Good job. Now, we're going to change the attributes of the slider so that the value is 1. Okay. Now what that means is, just like we did with our switch, what should this slider look like when our app starts? Well, having the slider right in the middle is not what we want, because that's going to be like half of a color. So what we want these sliders to do is start all the way full, and then the user can sort of unmix or mix the color from there. And to do that, we need to use the attributes. So if we click a switch, you can see we go over here and run our connections window. Let's switch that to attributes. There we go. And so now we're on attributes, and we can see this slider has a value of 0.5. Let me zoom in here for you. So it's saying that slider has a value of 0.5. I want that to be just 1.0, or you could probably just type 1. All right, so let's look Let's click on this one, change its value to 1. And then let's click on this one and change its value to 1. All right, value 1, minimum is 0, maximum is 2.5. No, that should probably be 1, I'm guessing. Now, one thing the book is telling you is you can select all 3 sliders and do it at the same time. So let's do that. I'm going to drag a box around all 3 sliders. And essentially what I want to happen is it's going to be between 0 and 1. So my minimum is 0, my maximum is 1, and I want each slider to start full. All right. So let's make that change and let's look back, and there we go. So each slider now starts at 1, which is all the way full. Perfect. Let's look back at our book here. And now what we need to do is we need to create an action. So it says control drag from each slider. We're going to do our outlets first and then our actions. So remember, just like our switches, these sliders need to have an action and outlet, because not only am I going to move it and something needs to happen, but when I hit my reset button, that slider needs to reset. So not only do we tell the slider what to do, but the code tells the slider what to do. So we're going to start by creating those outlets, and it says right here on page 6, name them red slider, green slider, and blue slider. So let's go over and let's do that. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and just to get my code ready, I'm going to come down here to where all of my outlets and actions are. I like to keep those together. So let's click on this first slider here. We're going to hold control and we're going to drag over, and we are going to make an outlet, and we are going to call this red slider. And remember to capitalize that S. Say connect. Gonna click the green one. Let's drop it in here. Remember, this is an outlet, and this is called green slider. Connect. Let's go to this blue slider here. We're gonna control drag over, and we're gonna call this, remember it's an outlet, and we're gonna call this blue slider. Awesome. Okay, so we've got our 1, 2, 3 outlets for our sliders. Perfect. Now it says right here, after that, control drag from the top slider to create an action called slider changed. Okay, so we're going to click our top slider. We're going to hold control. We're going to bring that over, and we're going to create an action, and this is called slider changed. Connect. All right. Now you'll notice we only did that with the one slider. That's because we're just going to connect these two to that action. Just like with the switches, we don't need to write the switch code 3 times. It's either on or off. We just write it once and, bring it over to the other 2 switches. Same thing with our slider. We're going to create that one action and tell all of the sliders to be based on that action. So let's go back to our book. And it says drag from the circle icon in the gutter by the new action to each of the other 2 sliders one at a time so they're connected. Okay, so what it's saying again is, remember these circles down here. If I highlight this action, slider changed, if I highlight the little circle, it says it's going to apply to that slider. Well, I also want it to apply to the one under it. So I'm going to click on this circle and drag over. This is like a reverse connection, right? And I'm going to drop it onto green. And now you notice it's doing the red and green. So let's add in our blue. So I'm just going to click and drag and then drop. And now when we highlight, we see that slider changed applies to all 3 sliders. Awesome. All right, let's see what we do next here. Let's go back to our book. And it says the slider changed action method is simple. Just call update color. But we need to update color, because right now it's just turning the color based on the switches. So here's what it wants us to do. Inside of this method here, slider changed, whenever we change a slider, we need to update the color. And that's the method that we wrote, update color. So each time we move any of those sliders, it's going to be updating the color. All right, perfect. And it says, aha, but update color needs to be updated because we need to add these sliders into it. We just have the switches in there now, right? So currently it sets, and I'm right here, currently it sets the value of each, sorry, I lost my spot, color component to 1 if the switch is on. So remember, it says, is the switch on or off? But now we need to add in that slider. Update each line so it uses the value of the slider. Okay. So let's look at this code, because we're going to have to do this to the blue and the green. We're going to move this down right here so we can see it. And so we're going to find our function that we wrote right here called update color. Remember, we wrote that earlier. And it says, if the red switch is on, turn red to 1. Well, we need to update that to look at the slider, the red slider now too as well. And so let's zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to pull this up. Remember our little trick? Okay. So the code should say now, if red switch is on, red equals not 1, because it's not just on or off, but what it equals is a CG float. Remember, that's a decimal point based on the red slider value. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see that. So we said if the switch is on, perfect, look at the slider. Where is the slider between 0 and 1? That's going to be a decimal point. We need to do that now for the green slider and the blue slider. So if the green switch is on, green should equal a decimal point based on the green slider value. Awesome. And if the blue switch is on, it should be based on a decimal point wherever the blue slider that value is. Okay. Now, I'm going to sneak this back down here. And here we go. Oops, I'm sorry. Here we go. It says add that to the green, into the blue, and then build and run. And you should be able to get just the color you want. All right, so let's go to our summary here. Let's go back to Xcode. I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to build and run this app. And so let's look back at our app here. All right, I see my sliders. Awesome. They are starting all the way full. And I see my buttons are started it off. So let's turn on our red. Awesome. Let's try our slider. Yeah. So as you can see, it's full red, no red. All right. So let's give it a little bit of red. Let's turn on our green. Okay, and let's kind of test that. Nice, we got full green, no green. So let's do like mostly green here. Let's turn on our blue, yes. And let's adjust this blue. All right, let's turn off this green, and there we go. Now you can see the different levels of purple. There's thousands of different purples we can get here. Congratulations. Not only did we add in our slider, but we updated our code so that our square changes color minutely depending on where all of our sliders are. Wow, that is awesome. Congratulations. 3 more actions, 3 more outlets, an interactive app that works great. You can turn all your colors on or off. Everything is working awesome. But let's say that you want to start back at 0. You want to give this iPad to your friend and you want them to find their favorite color, but they've got to start kind of mixed into your color. wouldn't it be nice if there was a button right here we could hit that sort of reset all this back to 0? Of course, that's what the book is going to have us build. So let's check that out. But pat yourself on the back. Congratulations. This is an incredible amount of skill and work that you've put into this. And we are going to sort of tie up some loose ends here. We are sort of on the back end. So here we go. We need to add in our reset button. And that is a button that sits down at the bottom of our screen here that we can tap and it resets everything. So let's figure out how we do that. And I'm on page 134. And it says open your storyboard and find a button in the object library. Drag it onto your scene. Name it reset in the attributes inspector. Okay. So let's go to Xcode. And we're going to zoom in again. Here's our interface. We need to add a button right down here. And so I'm going to go up to my plus. I'm going to hit that. And I'm going to type in button. And there it is. And we're going to drag that button out. And again, we want to drop it, I'm going to put it just right in the center of my screen. You can put your reset button anywhere. But I'm going to drop it right there. Let's zoom in. And as you can see, it is just called button. But we want to give the button a name. And usually you name your button what it does. Save, open, close, whatever that may be. This button is reset. So we need to name that. So I'm going to click on my button. And I'm going to go over here to my attributes inspector. And as you can see, it is called button. And so I'm going to call this reset. Hit enter. And let's zoom in and check it out. It is now a reset button. So again, this is a spot that you and your students have a lot of room to play with, right? You obviously can make your button much bigger if you want a border around it, if you want to give it a color, if you want to change the font, if you want to change the way that the letters are either all caps or bolded, however you want to do that. Again, I'm going by the book, so I want it to look like the book does. But this is, again, another awesome chance for students to sort of add their flair into it and mess around with the attributes of a button. So we are good. We have named our button reset. It's a teeny little button in the center of the screen. But as you can imagine, all it is a button. Until we write some code, that button will not do anything. So let's go back to our book and figure out what we should do. Okay. Now it says open the assistant editor and we need to create an action. Obviously, when we hit the button, some code needs to run. That's an action. So let's go do that. I'm sorry, I just keep going right back to the app. So we're going to click on our reset button here. And remember, we want to control drag over. So I'm going to hold control. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Oops. Now see, I accidentally changed that. I'm going to hit Command Z. Let's undo that. All right, so we were going to control drag over here. And let's just put it right here. And again, this is an action. I'm going to name this reset. Let me get this a better view for you here. So it is an action. We name it reset. And I'm going to click connect. Awesome. So let's go back to our book. And it says, all right, you'll see the button has been connected to the touch up inside event. So what that means is obviously when you touch a button, your finger goes down to touch the button and then it lifts off, right? Down and then off. That is the touch up inside event. That's what it was set to. So you want to start it right there. Give me 1 second here. Let me go click this over here. All right, sorry about that. I just didn't want to lose the feed here, and we needed to set that up. So, okay. When you click a button and lift your finger off, that's called a touch up inside event. In fact, each time you click the screen, that's an event, a touch event. So your reset button needs to perform its action when you lift off your finger, and that's what we did. So let me highlight where we're at here. Right here, and I'll zoom out. So it says our reset button, when we hit it, it needs to reset everything. So it needs to reset our buttons, it needs to reset our sliders, right? So add that code to the new action method. So this is the first time it just says add the code. It doesn't tell you what to type, it just tells you to type it. So I know that this is the point in the book where a lot of my students are like, wait, what do we put? So this is how it works, but challenge your students to think about what they're typing, and I bet it'll come to them. But here we go. We need to reset each of our things to how they began. We need to do that within this reset function right here. So it says action reset. When you hit that button, what should happen? So let's go to the brackets here. I'm going to hit enter twice just to create a little bit of room. So what should happen? Well, let's start with the switches. In fact, let's start with red switch. Red switch dot is on equals 0, right? So when I hit the reset button, that red switch, is it on? No. So it's turning off the red switch. But we can't say 0 because remember, a switch is either on or off, true or false. So red switch is on, false. Okay. Green switch is on equals false, right? And then finally, blue switch is on equals false. It wants lowercase. Okay, so there we have it. I'm sorry, I'll take off my thing here. So we did our switches. When I hit my reset button, are the switches on? No, false. Turns them all off. So how do we update our sliders? So let's start with red slider. Now remember, the slider has a value, dot value. And what do we want that value to be? Well, we want it to be 1, which is all the way up, right? That's how we want it to start. The switch is off and the slider's all the way up. So that red slider value is 1. What should the green slider value be? That should be 1. And what should the blue slider value be? 1. So here we go. When we hit the reset button, turn our switches off and set our sliders to full. Awesome. So let's double check with the book. So it says right here, your reset button, sliders value to 1, and the is on property to false. You've updated the switches and sliders, but you want the same behavior as if the user had changed the switches. To have the same behavior occur when the reset button is tapped, make sure you add a call to update color at the end of your action method. So what it's saying is, not only should you turn all these sliders and switches back to their original values, but you should also then update our square back to black. And to do that, we're going to call our update color function that we wrote earlier. So let's build and run this. Because our reset button should work. So let's try this out. So I'm going to go up here to the play button, Gonna hit build and run. Okay. Coming over here to the iPad, let's pull that up on the screen so you can see it a little bit better. Whoa, I have nothing. Do you see that? I have absolutely nothing here. So let me go back. Whoa, I added a breakpoint. Not sure. Wait, blue, it looks like I added a breakpoint. So hold on, let me get back here. Blue, red slider, update. Sorry about this, people. Update color. Okay, what happens is I added a breakpoint. Somehow I hit the key to add a breakpoint. A breakpoint means your code will run and then stop right there. And if you're building a really big app, you may want it to stop at a certain point before it goes and does everything else to see if what you did worked. So that's why this just happened, is my code just stopped right there. And so what I want to do is I'm going to right click on this. And if I hit cut, no, I do not want to do that. I want to remove the breakpoint. Okay, good. There it is. So I'm not sure exactly how I turned that on. I didn't deliberately do that. But here's the breakpoint. It's got this blue tab. I'm going to right click on that and say, delete that breakpoint. That doesn't need to be there. Okay. So now let's build and run this app. And let's check it out. Shoo, much better. Okay. So let's turn on red. Let's get a little bit of red here. Let's turn on green. Let's get a little bit of green. Turn on a little bit of blue. Let's get that nice purple there. Okay, your turn. Let's hit reset. Yes. So all the things we coded just happened. The switches all went back to off. The sliders all went back to their position, which is full. The square went back to a black square. And now the next person can mix their color. Hit reset. The next person can mix their color. What? That is awesome. So not only did you code in the way the whole app works, but you just now coded in a reset button to just reset that back to 0. That's pretty incredible. That's a lot of hard work, so congratulate yourself. We have a little bit to go, which is sort of polishing the user interface. So we're going to do that next, and then we're almost out of here. So I'm going to try to get this in under 2 hours. Thank you for all of your time. Again, if you have any questions, post them below or on Tech Teacher Sup and on Twitter. But let's get back to our app. So let's stop this. Let's get back to a view that you're used to here. Okay. All right. So we have our app. It is awesome. All of our colors work. Our reset button works. Let's do a little bit of polishing here. So we're going to go back to our book and we're going to see the last chapter is called Polishing the Interface. And again, this is where students can sort of tweak and work on the UI, the user interface, the way it looks and feels, right? And hopefully what you get in your class is multiple different versions of this app that each look a little bit different, and students have a lot of fun with this. This is, I know my favorite part is designing the interface. It's more fun to me than the actual coding sometimes, but this is an app that lets you do a little bit of both. So here we go, polishing the interface. One thing that you and I know is these are red, green, and blue, but there's no way to tell. In fact, when these switches are on, they all look green, and all of these sliders here look blue. So wouldn't it be cool if we actually made the switches and the sliders reflect the colors that they're turning on and off? And the book thinks that would be really cool too. So let's do that. Number 1, it says tinting the switches. So as you can see on the screen, and I'll pull up our switches here, these switches, whether they're on or off, are green, all 3 of them. And as you can see, the sliders are blue, right? But we want to make this red for the red switch, green for the green switch, and blue for the blue switch. And to do that, there's a property of these switches called tint, on tint. So let's look back at our book here. Each of these sort of user interface objects specifically has its parts named so that you can change those parts using the attributes. The switch has its parts named on tint color, which is that background color of the switch, and the thumb tint color, which is the color of the actual switch itself, which in this case is white. But we're going to change that. And to do that, we're going to open our main storyboard, select our switch, go over to that attributes inspector and change it to red. Let's go. So I'm going to go to my Xcode. Okay. And we're going to click on this. Let me zoom in. We're going to click on this first switch here. And we're going to go over to our attributes inspector. And there are the two things we just learned about, the on tint and the thumb tint. So we want to change that on tint, that background color. We don't want it to be the default green. We want that to be red because this is the red switch. And so we're just going to use the system red color. All right, that is the sort of built-in red color. Of course, you can use the color picker to choose your favorite shade of red if you want, but we're going to go by the book and do the system red color. So let's go down to this next switch. And this is the green switch. Well, we don't have to change anything because it's already green. So we could go in here and say tint, make it green, but you know what? It's already green. Why add any more extra code or changes that we don't need to, right? So we're going to go down to this third button, which is the blue button, and we're going to click over on tint, and we're going to go down to system blue. And that's right there, system blue color. Okay, and again, that's on our on tint. So there we go. We've given our red, green, and blue switches the correct color. So let's go back to our book. And tinting the sliders. And so again, as you can see, the slider has three very specific parts to it. The color of the track to the left of the slider, that's called the min track tint color. The actual slider button itself, which is the thumb tint color, and then the max track tint color, which is the slider above the thumb slider there. So we want to change that min track tint color because as you can see, it's blue in every slider. We don't want blue. We want that to reflect the red, green, and blue of the color that you're sliding. So we're going to highlight each slider and go over and change that min track color. Okay, so let's go back to Xcode. Let's zoom in here. Let's start with slider number 1. And then we're going to go over. And remember, we go over, I'll highlight my mouse. We go over to the right here. And as you can see, you have these options. So there's the min track. And because this is the red slider, we're going to go down here and find system red. Awesome. Okay, now the cool thing is you can see it changes on your screen. The reason the switches didn't change is because they're already off. So you're not going to see that until you turn it on. But the sliders should update as soon as you make that. Now we know the middle one here is green. So we're going to go over to min track, change that to system green. And then this last one needs to be blue. Well, it's already blue, so we don't need to change that one. Perfect. So we have red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue. Okay. Let's go back to our book. Now it says adding a border. So what it's saying here is, see our window here, just to sort of clean it up a little bit, let's put a black border around it to help it just separate from the screen a little bit here. Again, that's just like a polish you would do to it. And so let's go, over to page 140, adding a border. And it says to make your color view, your UI view here, stand out, regardless of what other color you have. Because remember, if it's white, you have white square on white background and there's nothing there. So a border is important for that. So we need to make this change in code. We're going to add a border just right into the code. And so we're going to go into View Did Load, and we're going to add in this code. So we're going to update and give this ColorView some new properties here. Okay, and so again, we're going to zoom in to our code here, and it says to add this to View Did Load, right? So there's update color. Let's go below that here, and we're going to sneak this up so we can see, and we're going to add a border width, radius, and color here. So let's start with ColorView layer border width equals 5. So we've taken our ColorView UI layer and added a border around it in a 5 pixel border width. And again, if students want to make this 1 or 10 or whatever, you can change the thickness of that border by changing that variable number there. Let's add in a corner radius. So instead of a 90-degree angle, let's make it nice and round in here. So we're going to say ColorView corner radius equals 20. Give it a nice sort of rounded edge there. And then finally, we're going to make the color of that border black. Again, if you made it red or green or purple or blue, it would clash with whatever color you're trying to mix. So we're going to give it a black border. So our ColorView layer border color equals UI color black CG color, essentially system black. All right, so we're going to make a black 5 pixel soft rounded radius border. Perfect. And again, that code gets added right to the View Did Load method here. Okay, function. So let's pull this down. All right, and it says for your final refinement, you want to prevent each slider from working when its switch isn't turned on. So what it's saying is, like, if your switch is off, what's the point of moving this slider around? It's not changing anything because you don't have your color turned on. So you're letting the user move something that's not making any changes, and it might confuse a person that that's not happening. So we're going to make it so if the switch is off, your slider is disabled. So remember, all controls have a property, and I'm right here at the bottom, is enabled, that allows it to be activated or deactivated. And sometimes you'll notice when things aren't available, they're kind of dimmed out, and it won't let you click it with your finger or your mouse, right? It's like dimmed. So that's the difference between is it enabled or disabled. So we're going to add a new method to make sure all of the sliders are enabled properly. So we're going to write this last chunk of code, which is a new method called update controls. So let's move this down here. And so let's cheat this up a little bit. All right, and I'm going to put this code in right here above our update color function. So give it a little breathing room. And so we're going to say function update controls, and that's the name of it. And what should update controls do? Well, it should update the sliders and the switches. So red slider is enabled only if red switch is on. So don't even let the slider move around if the switch isn't on, right? You can kind of read that right in English. The blue slider is only enabled if the blue switch is on. And finally, the green, give a new line here. Finally, the green slider is only enabled if the green switch is on. All right, perfect. So this is a function we just wrote called update controls, and it's simply saying only let the slider be messed with if we've turned on that colors switch. Awesome. Let's cheat this back down and we'll go back to our book. Let's pull this up. Okay, so this function must be called whenever a switch is changed. Add this line inside the switch changed action. So this update controls method we just wrote, we want that to run each time a switch is changed. So we need to go down here and find our switch changed function. It's right down here at the bottom. And not only is it going to update the color, but it's going to update controls each time we flip a switch. Awesome. Let's go back to our book. Also add a call from ViewDidLoad so that the sliders are enabled correctly when your app first launches. Also add this to reset so it works when you reset the app. So we have to add it to ViewDidLoad and to reset. So let's find ViewDidLoad right up here at the top. Here's ViewDidLoad. So let's add in update controls. Awesome. And then it also wants us to add that to the reset. So here's our reset function. Update color. Update controls. Doo-doo. Whoops. Okay. So we wrote update controls and then we added it to the different places it needs to update, which is the reset button when it first starts. Okay. Now it says build and run your app. You'll notice the sliders can't be used until the switches are turned on. And there is a summary and there's the end. We're at the end. Let's do it. I am going to pull up the iPad. We're going to go over here and we're going to build and run for the very last time. Here we go. Build and run. Let's see what happens. Now, as you can see, we cannot move this slider because we haven't turned on red yet. So let's turn on red. And beautiful, there's our border, our 5-pixel border with a nice radius on the corner there. And now our slider is available. And again, we can't do our green slider until green is turned on. And then we're going to turn on blue and do a little bit of that as well. And then we should hit reset. And again, the sliders are now disabled. Whoa. Let's just pull up. And you can see white here now has the border around it, which makes it that much better. Wow, congratulations. Thank you. We just hit, we're at 2 hours and 3 minutes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming along for the ride. We just built our first iOS app. You are an iOS developer now. You've done some interface building. You've written some code. You've done some debugging and troubleshooting. You've connected up your device and interacted with it. Now you got to take this and you have to show your friends. You have to show your family. You have to brag about all of your new skills because it's pretty incredible what you just did. So thank you for hanging out with us today. Thank you for all of your growth mindset work. Every time you ran into a wall, you pushed through it. And I think that's pretty awesome. So if you have any questions about what we did today, you can post them in the comments below and I'll help you out down there. Or you can post on our Twitter at TechTeacherSup and we'll figure it out there. Either way, we're going to help you get here so you can have a cool app too and show off all of your new iOS development skills. So if you want to take this further, obviously, through the book, you can go on right here to chapter 18 and start learning about how to adapt this to different devices. You could also go back and do some of the earlier apps if you wanted to. But I think this app in particular is the best sort of culmination of all the fundamental things that you need to do to start building your own first app. So if you have some cool app ideas, I hope now you understand a little bit more how apps are made and you are well on your way to figuring out how to make your app. And hopefully I see your app on the App Store one day too. So again, thank you very much for your time. Have a great weekend. My name is Chris. Let me know if you have any questions and we'll figure it out. So take it easy and come back where we're going to do some more robotics and coding and building, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So, all right. Peace out.